Beneath the sands of Egypt, maybe about 100 kilometers southwest of Cairo, lies the site of extraordinary historical and biblical significance. This is where Joseph stored grain for the 7 years of famine. And since Jesus foretold us that famines just like that would occur in the end times, today we're going to learn and apply the lessons this ancient site can teach us about how we might prepare for what's coming. Just like Joseph did, including the probable year that the famine starts, how much food to put away, how your church can organize the storage, etc., etc. Now, if you follow this channel for any time, you're already aware that Jesus commands his wise servants to act like Joseph in the end times. So we should study these ancient ruins, the remnants of a grand network of canals and grain storage facilities. Really an incredible engineering feat. And they've been traditionally linked to the biblical figure of Joseph, and you'll see why in just a couple seconds. So these areas have much to teach us. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this channel, let me introduce you to a riddle that Jesus told us in Matthew 24:45 about this exact thing. Who then is the faithful and wise slave, whom his Lord has made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season? This verse can be seen as a 3-clue riddle pointing to Joseph from the book of Genesis with the following clues. The person is a faithful and wise slave. Well, Joseph demonstrated a lot of faithfulness and wisdom after being sold into slavery by his brothers. He's made a ruler over his household. Joseph was made ruler over Potiphar's house as a slave and later appointed by Pharaoh as overseer of the whole land of Egypt. And Genesis 41:40 records it this way: Thou shalt be over my house, and according unto thy word shall all my people be ruled. And then the third clue, to give them meat in due season. Joseph's primary responsibility during the 7 years of famine was to distribute food to the people of Egypt and to surrounding nations, including his brothers, the Hebrews. Because the meaning of this riddle is not well known, you might not have been familiar with it, but now that you've seen it, I am sure you cannot unsee it. And when you read that passage in Matthew 24, it's obvious that Jesus wants his faithful and wise servants to be like Joseph, that God wants us to provide food for his household in the famine that's coming. Let's come to a full stop here. I want you to realize this applies whether you think you will personally face the famine or not. And then very next verse, Matthew 24:46, Jesus said, Blessed is the servant that his master finds so doing when he comes. Jesus expects all of us to be providing for his children right up until his return, just like Joseph, regardless of when we think that return is. So studying what Joseph did and where he did it is key to being a faithful and wise servant. So a great place to start is, hey, when does that famine begin? 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Pharaoh was given a dream of 7 years of plenty and 7 lean years. These 7-year periods are not accidental. They match up exactly with the Hebraic way of telling time in 7-year increments, or what they call shabuim, as we see in Leviticus 25. The same 7-year periods are found in Daniel's 70-week prophecy in Daniel 9. So the lean years, in our opinion, are prophetic of the 70th week of Daniel, or the tribulation. Jesus told us there'll be famines in the tribulation. So how far into that tribulation will the famine begin? We know that the famines are the equivalent of what happens at the 3rd seal of Revelation. The Bible doesn't tell us when each seal opens, but there's 7 seals and there's 7 years. So it's supposition, but a seal could open each year, and that year would be governed by the seal and its writer. If that's true, the 3rd seal would open at the beginning of the 3rd year of the tribulation, and the famine would happen sometime during that year. It's interesting that in the account of Joseph, when his brothers came to buy grain from him, he said these words, There are yet 5 years of famine left. That's Genesis 45:11, meaning that they were in the 3rd year. So if I had to guess, and it's only a guess, the famine is going to begin in the 3rd year of the tribulation. And if you follow this channel, you already know that we believe the 7 years of plenty began with the sign of the woman in labor on the Feast of Trumpets in 2017. Do you remember that sign? It made worldwide news. If you wondered what it meant and why a rapture didn't happen then, now you know. It wasn't about a rapture. It marked the beginning of the birth pangs. It was a woman in labor, after all. That would place the beginning of a tribulation, if that was the 7 years of plenty, on the Feast of Trumpets in 2024. And sure enough, a great secular covenant with the many was approved at that time, the UN's Pact for the Future, and it began to be enforced on the exact day of the Feast of Trumpets. If that's true, this would mean the tribulation would end on Yom Kippur 2031, and the rapture would be on the Feast of Trumpets 2030. And sure enough, great star signs take place on both of those dates, as if to confirm this. We have links to videos about the start of a tribulation and the star signs at the end of this one, and you can check them out when you see all of this one. The takeaway, however, is if we're correct and the tribulation has begun, the third seal may open in the third year of the 70th week, which begins 2 years from now, on the Feast of Trumpets 2026. If we're correct, that is how much time we have left, 2+ years before the famines. So learning about Joseph's methods is a must right now, because he had a full 7 years and we only have 2. Let's look at the region where Joseph carried out his miracle of saving Egypt and his family then, because time is short. One of the most striking features of this Elf Yom site is its extensive canal system, known as Joseph's Sea by ancient historians. This system surrounds pyramids and thousands of grain storehouses and holds the secrets of resilience, leadership, and survival, and they resonate across the 3,800 years since Joseph. The main canal branched into smaller tributaries, and it was a 180-mile waterway constructed to both bring life-giving irrigation to a region that hadn't had agriculture before and to transport the grain to other regions that needed it. Dr. Marcus Albright, a renowned Egyptologist, underscores the significance of this feat. This was not just irrigation, he said. It was a lifeline for a civilization preparing for adversity. The level of planning and engineering suggests a figure of remarkable vision and foresight, aligning with the biblical account of Joseph. End of quote. So Albright definitely sees this as Joseph, A, because the Egyptians called it Joseph's Sea, and B, because of the amazing engineering that went into this. So the canal system is genius. After Joseph was appointed to feed Egypt, he realized he had to do things differently. Just doing things the same old way wasn't going to cut it with a 7-year famine that was coming. So he irrigated a new area where they hadn't grown crops before so that they could have more crops than usual. If you look at a map of the region today showing where vegetation grows, you can see this small triangular region in Lower Egypt that obviously still has vegetation today because of Joseph. If we apply this to the end-time famine that most of us will have to endure, it means if we're going to be like Joseph, we have to think outside the box as well. In 2015, I rented a climate-controlled storage unit and began to put away food for my house church. I would be interested in what other out-of-the-box ideas you guys might have, because we're all in this together. I will check the comments on this video for your ideas. Now, returning to Joseph's storage area, the area, as we said, was known locally as Elf Yom, which is a Hebrew word, which translates to 1,000 days in Hebrew. The area's Hebraic roots are echoing in that name, and the fact it was called Joseph's Sea. I mean, how can you deny that this was what Joseph used, this area? Now, 1,000 days is about 2 years, 9 months, so it took them quite a while to design the way that they would provide during the famine. In fact, about a third of the total time of the 7 years of preparation was used to dig the canal and build the storehouses. But I bet you're thinking to yourself, hey, but you just said we don't have 7 years. Yes, that's true, but we should expect our preparation to take time as well. We may not have 1,000 days, but who knows? Maybe we have exactly 1,000 days from your watching this video. Maybe God is timing this video that exactly. I mean, it's possible. A good way to count down to this is to place a jar with either 720 or 1,000 marbles. Put it in your house, and each day take a marble away to remind yourself how close we are to that countdown. Now, standing near the canal is a very peculiar structure, a pyramid constructed not out of stone like other pyramids in Egypt, but of mud bricks, reinforced with straw. The material of choice is really uncommon for pyramids, which were all typically made out of limestone or granite. It was discovered in 1968 by a team of Polish archaeologists, and the bricks bear the name Amen-Emhat III, who is a known pharaoh whose name means beloved of the invisible God. This discovery has deepened the connection between the site and the biblical Joseph, who served under 3 pharaohs during the 12th dynasty of Egypt, 1900 to 1800 BC. Biblical historian Dr. Evelyn Carter explains the use of mud bricks suggests humility and practicality, unlike the grandiose stone pyramids built by the pharaohs who declared themselves gods. This aligned with the character of a ruler who recognized a divine authority. Obviously, the Pharaoh of the famine trusted God's word given him through Joseph's interpretation of his dream and took a name, Amen-Emhat, to proclaim this idea. So, how did they use the pyramid? Well, we don't know. However, the most likely use was as an administrative building. Beyond the pyramid are the remains of thousands of grain storehouses, which once stood as a testament to Joseph's leadership as described in the Bible. Archaeological surveys have identified like 3,000 of these, both above ground and even below ground. Many of these structures have collapsed over the millennia, so the area looks like mounds that resemble ski moguls. Rabbi Samuel Klein, a theologian and historian, reflects on the spiritual undertones of doing something like this. Joseph's story is one of divine inspiration, meaning human integrity. So the third takeaway from this site is that these ideas didn't come to Joseph on his own, but with divine guidance. And our plans shouldn't either. Don't undertake a plan without praying it up first. So think about the pyramid as an administrative building. What might have happened there? In Genesis 41:34 through 35, we learn Joseph's plan. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. The takeaway here is that Joseph was given the prescriptions for how much food to put away, 20%. If you're planning to put away food in storage, as God desires for all his faithful and wise slaves, that is the amount. If you consume $100 of food per week as a family, then put $20 extra away into storage. You can do this either by using $20 that you would have spent on something else, or by buying less expensive food to stretch the money you're already spending. It can be done either way, regardless of your budget. It's simply a matter of will, whether you will do it. If you doubt this, that you should do this, read Revelation 6:6, where the third seal is described. At that time, hyperinflation is going to occur, where food prices will increase 100-fold. Food that you put away today at today's prices will be worth 100 times as much in just a couple years. We're thinking, 2.5 years. It is the most incredible investment that you could make at this time if you were thinking of nothing but money. And I guess I should give one of those disclaimers now at this time that I'm not a professional advisor on investments, but you know the spiel. It was at that point that Pharaoh appointed Joseph as head of his house. It appears Joseph had a 2-part storage plan. Genesis 41:48 through 49. He put in every city the food from the fields around it, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea. So he had a local storage, in which local overseers were in charge in each of the cities, and central storage that Joseph controlled. How can we apply this? Well, one way is for every family in your church to store locally in their houses or storage units, and also to contribute to a larger communal store of food. And how was it used? Well, then the famine hit, and we're going to see. In Genesis 41 and 42, we learn that Joseph personally sold grain to the Egyptians and all the rest of the earth who came to Egypt to buy from Joseph. It appears this sale took place at El Fayum, and Joseph likely sat in that very pyramid administrative building. It was there he likely met his brothers when they came looking for grain. The takeaway from all this is the food stored by your church should not just be for ourselves, but for the world who comes looking for help as well. Imagine the testimony that will be, in that you said, oh yeah, well, we knew this was coming because we believe the Bible. So we put this food away, and here it is. Let us share it with you. The reason Joseph was personally in charge of the distribution to the nations was because discernment was needed. And discernment is going to be needed for the future as well. So we should choose well who it is that does that distribution. Now, you may be wondering how enough food can be put away for so vast a need. The simple answer is that it can't be. You could never put away enough food. But God can provide as much as needed. Notice in Matthew 24:46 that God expects his faithful and wise slaves to be doing this until he comes. He expects us to be distributing food right up to the time of the rapture. So God has a plan that we don't know anything about yet to provide that food. In the prophetic letter to Pergamum, which is about the third seal and the famine in the book of Revelation, Jesus said those who overcome will be given some of his hidden manna. Just like in the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus used the lunch of a little boy to feed a vast multitude because the little boy gave away all he had to Jesus. That is what Jesus expects of us. No more than all we can do as a human. And we know we can't do enough. So then he will take care of the rest and give us his hidden manna. But I realize all this depends on when you should start putting away food in the way of Joseph's example, which teaches us how to do it. If you want to learn about why the tribulation has already begun and we're already behind the 8 ball in terms of putting away food, then click right here to keep watching and discover answers to your 8 toughest questions about the beginning of the tribulation, or click over here to learn about the star signs, or watch them both. This is Nelson, and I'll see you here or there.